I'll try to talk loud since the microphone's still not working. The first reading today is from Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 through 17. God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall now bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord, your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the third and the fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the thousandth generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to your Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For the 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, or ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Our psalm today is Psalm 17. This is read responsively. The heaven declare the glory of God, and the sky proclaims its maker's handiwork.
One day tells its tale to another, and one night imparts knowledge to another.
Although they have no words or language, and their voices are not heard,
their sound has gone out into all lands, and their message to the ends of the world, where God has pitched a tent for the sun.
It comes forth like a bridegroom out of his chamber. It rejoices like a champion to run its course.
It goes forth from the uttermost edge of the heavens and runs about to the end of its camp. Nothing is hidden from its burning heat.
The teaching of the Lord is perfect and revives the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure and gives wisdom to the simple.
The statutes of the Lord are just and rejoice the heart. The commandment of the Lord is clear and gives light to the eyes.
The fear of the Lord is clean and endures forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether.
More to be desired are they than gold, more than much fine gold, sweeter far than honey and comb.
By them also is your servant enlightened, and in keeping them there is great reward.
Who can detect one's own offenses? Cleanse me from my secret faults.
Above all, keep your servant from presumptuous sins. Let them not get dominion over me. Then shall I be whole and sound and innocent of a great offense.
Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my redeemer.
The second reading is from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 18 through 25. The message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since, in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, God decided, through the foolishness of our proclamation, to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks desire wisdom, but we proclaim God crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those who are the called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. For God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. Thus ends the readings.
Our gospel reading this morning is John chapter 2, verses 13 through 22. Glory to you, O Lord. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. Making a whip of cords, he drove all of them out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle. He also poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. He told those who were selling the doves, "Take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then said to him, "What sign can you show us for doing this?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "This temple has been under construction for 46 years. And will you raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Christ. You may be seated. Good morning.
Good morning.
This gospel lesson can actually be kind of divided into two distinct chunks. In the first chunk, Jesus is talking about the temple as the actual physical temple building. And in the second chunk, he is talking about the temple as his body. And I think John stuck these two chunks together for a reason. I think John wants us to interpret these two parts in light of one another. And so, that begs the question, does Jesus' body need to be cleansed of the cattle, the sheep, and the money changers? Obviously, Jesus' literal physical body does not. But is this true of the church? Does the church need a good purging every once in a while to get rid of the money changers and the merchandise and the marketplace that has taken up residence in the temple that is the church? We might point to a few possibilities of culprits in this. We might say the prosperity gospel preachers who teach that God will bless you richly with money, actual literal money, if you're a good Christian. And we might say that is making a marketplace of the church. We might also point to those really big churches that have not just coffee, but coffee shops, like actual branded Starbucks shops inside the churches. And we might say, well, engaging in commerce in that way might be making a marketplace out of the temple of God. But I think those are easy for us to say. That's not what we do here. But there is something that's more pervasive, something that might impact even us here in rural Nebraska, where even we could use a bit of a purging of the marketplace from the temple of God. And to make this case, I need to go back to my childhood. When I was in elementary school over at St. John's Lutheran Church in Utan, not very far away, I was at one point perusing the bookshelves. Our church library was not extensive. It was a couple of bookshelves in the Sunday school wing. But they had some books that you'd expect, very boring stuff, a commentary on the book of 1 Corinthians, things like that. But there was one set of books that was exciting. It was the Left Behind series. And I asked some well-meaning adult, "What's this?" And they said, "Oh, those are books about the rapture." And I said, "Oh, what's the rapture?" And they said, "Well, that's when God takes away all the good Christians before the tribulation that comes at the end of history, and then God really hammers down on the world for a while after taking the good guys away." And I thought, oh, okay. And I didn't realize that was a problem at the time, but years later, I came to know that, in fact, the rapture is distinctly not Lutheran theology. No Lutheran schools talk about the rapture, nor do Presbyterian schools. I don't really think Methodist schools teach about it either. Catholics don't really like it. Furthermore, it's not just that they don't teach it. I think most Lutheran theologians would actually go so far as to say the rapture is bad theology. It is maybe even so wrong that it might be harmful theology. So if this is so not fitting for Lutheran theology, why was the Left Behind series in my Lutheran church prominently displayed on the bookshelves? There was a time when Christian booksellers sold books specifically for clergy, for pastors. They were theology books written by the theologians of their denominations. This still happens. There are still booksellers who market particularly to pastors. But there's a problem. They're kind of inaccessible to lay people. In fact, having been at seminary for 4 years, I can tell you that they're kind of inaccessible to pastors. Theology books are not easy to read. They're very technical, and sometimes they are only written and only readable for other theologians, academic theologians. So there was a time when most people were not reading Christian books. But that changed in the mid-1900s when there was another crisis that was happening. A crisis that might not be affecting us so much out here, but across the country it was. There was a crisis, at least a perceived crisis, in masculinity. As more men were moving into cities and suburbs and working office jobs instead of working on the farm or in a trade, obviously out here, still a lot of farmers. But in big cities and big suburbs, a lot of men were just punching into an office. And there was a restlessness in that. Around this time, you got a lot of movies that were Westerns, because the image of masculinity became the lost figure of the cowboy and the frontiersman. Rugged, tough, independent man who could tell off anyone that tried to be rude to them or get in their way, and could fight and fight hard. That became what the image of masculinity that people tried to resurrect as more men were moving into boring jobs, so to speak. And at the same time, there was a crisis of communism versus capitalism and patriotism. And all of these things got tied together as one particular set of people decided that there needed to be one particular image of what Christianity and masculinity and families should look like. The side that won out was, broadly speaking, white evangelical Christians, especially from the American South. The reason that they won out is because there were megachurch pastors and other writers who would write books. There were Christian publishing houses that would publish their books. Now, these books were about Christian living, not about theology. They were written for everyone. So they were accessible. They got onto the shelves of Christian bookstores, but the Christian bookstores were also evangelical, broadly speaking. And the result was they would platform the books they agreed with and not platform the books they disagreed with. You can actually still see this today if you go into the Christian bookstore in Lincoln, Mardel. You'll notice there's two Bibles that evangelicals really like. The KJV, because it's old, and the ESV, because it was written by evangelicals. They don't like the NRSV, which is what we use. If you go into Mardel and you look at their Bible section, the ESV and the KJV are displayed prominently. You have to search hard to find the NRSV. I'm not suggesting that Mardel is necessarily an evangelical Christian bookstore, but that is how it works. Books that agree with what they believe in, with what the booksellers believe in, those get featured in the right places on the bookshelves. And so that is what people buy. And the more people buy those, the more money those publishers and those pastors and writers make, incentivizing more books like that. These market forces go back and forth against each other and creates a feedback loop that gives more and more money and more power to the people that the booksellers agreed with in the first place. That is how you get a book about the rapture on a Lutheran church's bookshelves. Because over time, this became what it means to be Christian. The outward cultural-facing Christianity was determined by evangelical book publishers, booksellers, and pastors. Now, to show just how pervasive this is, I already mentioned Mardel. If you listen to Christian radio around here, you have pretty much two choices: Catholic radio and positive, encouraging K-Love. Now, the interesting thing about K-Love, their parent company gets its finances done by a finance company founded by Billy Graham, the evangelical pastor. I'm not suggesting that K-Love is necessarily evangelical, but they are closer to Billy Graham than they are to Martin Luther. I'll say that. And this is not to say that Mardel's is bad and that K-Love is bad. All of these things are nice things, and if you like listening to Christian radio, more power to you. This is great. But this is, broadly speaking, what cultural Christianity looks like. And the way we got here is because of money moving. It was a marketplace in the temple. Now, there are theologians who will say that the rapture is definitively bad ideology. What Tim LaHaye wrote about, that pastor that wrote the Rapture series, that was bad. Not just bad, but harmful. And I might agree with the theologians who say that. But that wasn't the only thing that was being written at this time. There was a lot of books about how to live in a Christian family. A lot of these ideas pushed for a very dominant, aggressive masculinity and a subdued, submissive femininity. Women were supposed to be quiet and do whatever the man asked, and the man was supposed to be aggressive and defend the house. You might already have some problems with that, but it gets a little worse. There was one particular pastor, Jack Hyles, who wrote several books, including 3 books about raising children, who explicitly said that the way to discipline your kids is by hitting them at least 15 times whenever something breaks out. And this should start with infants. You should hit infants. And you should hit your children. If you hit your children hard enough to leave marks, well and good. This was a pastor who had 100,000 people at his church. There's a story that is recounted in which someone was picking on his daughter, and he told his son, like one of the neighbor boys was picking on his daughter, and he told his son, go take care of him. And by take care of him, he meant beat him. And his son beat him to the point of drawing blood from this neighbor kid. And this was celebrated by the pastor, who also wrote 3 popular books about raising children. This is the shape Christianity took because money was moving. And this is the sad story of how you get a series about the rapture in a Lutheran church. Now, I'm not saying that we need to protest Christian bookstores, and I'm not saying that we need to protest Christian radio, but what I am saying is we need to take seriously This is the culture that we're in. This is the backdrop that we're working in. This is what people look at Christianity and see. And if you're an outsider looking in and you see Christianity means belief in a rapture, you might say, I don't know if I like this God. This God who's going to save God's favorite people and then beat everyone else to death. I don't know if I like this. And if you are someone from the outside looking in and you see people saying the only way to be Christian is to have an aggressive, dominant man and a demure, submissive woman in the household, if you're a quiet, shy, reserved man or a go-getter of a woman, you might say, I don't think I like that. Maybe this isn't for me. And if you're someone who was abused as a child because your parents were convinced that the only way to discipline children is to leave marks when you beat them, because that's the Christian way of doing it. If you grew up fighting because you grew up in a culture that believed that Christian men are not wimps, they fight. They beat up the neighbor kids. That's what Christians do. If that's what you grew up with, you might think that Christianity is just bad and is not something you need in your life. We are fighting an uphill cultural battle in proclaiming the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, that you are saved by God's love for you, apart from your works, apart from your loyalty to some particular cultural norms and mores, a particular way of living, that you are saved because God's grace for you. And sometimes these other writings get in the way of that. Cultural Christianity gets in the way of that gospel message. And what's most sad about that, in addition to the people who have been hurt by it, is that it didn't get there because theologians and pastors were faithfully or as faithfully as they could proclaiming the gospel. And it didn't get there because the church, the people of God, were living out their Christian traditions. It got there because money was moving among publishers and booksellers and authors. Martin Luther did not see himself as starting something new. He saw Jesus as the first reformer of the church. Because even back in Jesus' time, there was a cultural backdrop that no one could argue with. Everyone thought, this is the way things are done. This is the way things have always been done. This is what it looks like to follow God. And Jesus called them to repentance. Said, no, maybe there's a different way to do this. Maybe there's another way to love God and love your neighbor. Maybe we can do better than this. And that is a message that Jesus took to the cross, to the grave, and through the empty tomb. That is a message that lives on because God gives that message life out of death. Even in the face of the uphill battle we fight, we can have faith that God's gospel will prevail. Because even in death, the gospel prevails. For the sake of us and our work as Christians, for the sake of future generations, and for the sake of everyone who has been hurt by the image of cultural Christianity that has prevailed in this country, we hope and pray that Jesus comes and cleanses the temple again. Amen. Thank